Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the plenary session of this afternoon of the 16th Symposium of Irish Studies in South America. It is my pleasure to introduce Caetano Galindo. Caetano Valdrigues Galindo teaches at the Federal University of Paraná in Curitiba, Brazil. Has been involved with James Joyce's work for the last 20 years, having already published translations of Ulysses, Finn's Hotel, and Giacomo Joyce, a portrait of the artist as a young man, Dubliners, and forthcoming next year, Exiles and Poems. Caetano Galindo, it's a pleasure to have you here. You know, my fellow Joycean.
Yeah.
I feel like we're, simply resuming a conversation at this moment.
Yes, permanent conversation.
A permanent conversation, an everyday conversation. Your plenary session is entitled Many Exiles in Joyce's Exiles. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Vitor. Thank you for the invite, for everybody involved in organizing and getting all this together. We were talking before, and we know it's kind of an Olympic task to get such a thing together, and it's wonderful to have colleagues with stamina and the capacity to bring these things together. I feel very privileged to be here, to be talking to my friend Vitor and my co-worker, so to speak, and to be talking about Joyce for an audience of Joyceans, which is not that common sometimes. We are always speaking about Joyce to non-Joyceans. We're always introducing Joyce, even like 100 years after Ulysses has been published. We're always introducing the book to newer audiences, which is pretty much okay when you are a teacher and when you're a translator. That's what we do. We introduce texts and we like to do it. So it's a pleasure. It's a different situation to be here among the Joyceans. I always feel something of a black sheep among the Joyceans because I'm a practical man. I'm a worker. I'm a translator, and I feel always very humbled by people like Vitor and everyone involved in this whole symposium. Anyway, it's good to learn, so it's good to be here with you and talking about this. As Vitor has told you, there will be forthcoming a new translation of Exiles and Poems, which is pretty much the last but one book I should be doing with this Joyce project. Vitor is involved in it. It's something I'd like to leave for posterity here. He's annotating the whole book, and he has helped with everything from organizing it to setting up the whole edition. So it's pretty much a joint venture we're doing with this book, and it kind of motivates what I may have to talk about here. Well, without further ado, let's get to it. My point here, when I start saying that I'm a black sheep among Joyceans, that I am a translator, that I am a worker, a handyman, essentially, when it comes to Joyce, is fundamentally this. I want to go this way when I talk about the play, when I talk about the word exile, and when I talk about my choices as a translator and a reader of the play. Because when you are a translator, you are a go-between. You are someone who helps contacts, who tries to get people together. May it be the author and their readers, a readership that was not even like part of the dreams of the original author, and a readership that may be separated from them for everything like centuries sometimes, and oceans and worlds of difference. And you are the person that is supposed to bring those extremes together and to generate a conversation. But also, when you're a translator, you're a go-between, in that you go between the author and the book. The author, whatever we decide to call this literary theoretical stance, that person or concept we may describe as the author, and that thing we may describe as the book or the text, the words on the page. What I mean here is that me and all translators, we're not only like readers and interpreters that get from the page to the world, but also we have to go before that, and we have to ask rather awkward questions about the whys, the wherefores, and the hows, to how these words came to be there, how that text came to be as it is, what may perhaps have gone through the mind of the person writing those lines, but also what could be like the structural and the, I don't know, sometimes even like the philosophical reasons behind how those words were put together in that certain way. This is kind of complicated to describe, as you may well see right now, but it is also the best way for you to guarantee that what you will propose as a translation, as a new version of the same text, has a shot at generating the same effects, at doing the same thing that the original text did, provided you get those motives, you get those hows, those whys and wherefores right. You can put yourself in a situation where you feel capable of writing the same book again, which is fundamentally what we do, writing the same book once more. And doing this to a writer like James Joyce is something that changes lives and changes whole careers. My career as a literary translator has been married to my work with James Joyce's prose from the beginning. I was translating Ulysses even before I was a literary translator. That was like my first major project. And I am still translating Joyce, even though I have been around by this time. But I have been learning with Joyce, and I've been not only like learning with the books in this movement from the page to the world, my world, but also by this need to get in there and to pull those things apart and to get to understand how they work, what makes them tick, and how those things were put together, how those artifacts, those books as artifacts, as utterances, yes, but also as artifacts, how they were put together. Because Joyce, as everyone here will know, is not a writer who took language as a given, as something that was there to be used, to be employed for different means and ends. He was someone who set himself tasks. He saw problems. He saw things he had to solve through literature in his books. He wanted to say different things, to go further, to delve deeper. And for that, it would not do to take language as this prefabricated thing given him by the ancestrals or by tradition or by whatever, that would be plastic enough and powerful enough for him to apply it to his work. He was from the very beginning someone who was trying to develop a new toolkit, so to speak. And that involved considering language as his true object of work. He was trying to make language do things it was not used to do before. And when I say language, I do not only mean the English language or literary language. When we get to Finnegan's Wake, as we all know very well, we do mean language as like the human faculty to use language and the relationship between language and the world. He was that deep when we got to that point, when he got to that point, sorry. And when you translate those books, when you face those very same dilemmas he faced, you are forced to put yourself in the position where you have to think deep enough, and where you have to like it's a situation where you have to go all the way. When you translate like a portrait of the artist as a young man, you have to remember that you are dealing with a new sort of flexibility in the language that has to evolve together with the character, and has to do it in a subtle way, but in a very effective way, in order to get a new sort of formation novel of Bildungsroman, where you get the language to evolve together with a character. Okay, this had not been done in English before when he did it. And when someone translates the book to a different tradition, this is again a new starting point. You have to create this possibility in your language. When you translate Ulysses, well, I'm not even going to go there. All sorts of things have to be thought again, thought like ex ovo from the very beginning, because you're not employing the tools that you may have developed or created or inherited from your previous work with novels, with literature, with anything. You have to, it's a blank slate. You have to rethink your relation to language, like your language, and to language as a human faculty sometimes, to do again, to redo what Joyce did in Ulysses. It makes no sense to get from the page to the translation. You have to get deeper than that. You have to put the thing apart again, and understand how it was done, understand why it was done the way it was done, so that you can feel in a certain degree safe to do what you have to do. Well, Finnegan's Wake, it's a different beast altogether, and this is like this is the future. This is something I'll do like beginning next year if I'm able to do it. So we're not going to get there, at least right now. But what I mean is that when you develop as a translator, at the same time dealing with the succession of works published by Joyce, you get kind of used to see these problems in this very different light. And when you get to a work like Exiles, which I have been translating for a few years already, this was a book that took its time in gestation, so to speak. You get to employ these new found faculties or doubts, at least, to a very different sort of text. And that happens in a lot of levels, a lot of spheres, so to speak. The play is this little gem of forgotten work in the canon of such a major artist. It is a very strange creature in a lot of senses. And as a translator, you have to face very awkward decisions. And those begin with things like, are those dialogues supposed to be or feel real or realistic? Joyce was an amazing writer of dialogue. He could get voices and had a feel for voices and authenticity and interaction between characters. You can see that in Ulysses in a way that was, I'd say, like unheard of in previous. But then you get to the play and you see a certain sort of, well, I have to say it, a certain sort of staginess, a certain sort of stilted quality to the voices and how people talk and how they exchange lines. It feels rehearsed. It feels sometimes hard to understand. And well, he was everything but naive. So we have to say, what was he trying to do here? And should I go for should I like do this again? Should this be a repetition of this effect in Portuguese or in whatever language I'm working with? Should I correct that sensation? Should I upgrade the representation of the dialogues? How should I deal with Archie Is it okay that this child speaks that way with the adults, to the adults, like as an equal to them in terms of linguistic competence and depth, so to speak? Those are like decisions that are well behind what you will do in terms of translating such a word for such a word, such a construction for such a construction. You have to really understand what was the project behind that. You have to have a certain degree of faith in your author to say that, yeah, he chose to do it that way. I may not know why, I may not understand perfectly what he was trying to do here, or even if he was successful in doing what he was trying to do. But you have to convince yourself that you have a certain understanding of what was at stake there, what was his project, what was his thesis with that play. We need not go there, though, to illustrate what I think I may have to say about the play and translation. Because the point is, I I was saying before that when you translate a portrait of the artist, you have to understand that there are many voices. The aisle is full of voices in that book, that they converge in that one person, but at Stephen Dedalus. But at the same time, that this full person will only like come to exist by the end of the book, because the language will be like consolidated around this personality. It's a very labored process of building one from many voices, from many positions, from many representations. Well, Ulysses is, of course, the odyssey of the many. Even though we have those centers of values, and even though we may have something we can call like a standard level of language for that does most of the narration of the book, there is an endless scope of voices, styles, perspectives, registers, and well, even historicities involved in the book. And you, as a translator, have to fully understand that your role is not, I was about to say your paper, because I am translating mentally from Portuguese. That's translation for you. Your role in this situation is to other yourself, to become different persons, different voices, different speakers at each time in the same book. And that what will give the book its unity, the fact that it comes together as a conglomerate of voices, perspectives, differences, and othernesses, so to speak. Finnegan's Wake, and here we might as well dip a toe in Finnegan's Wake, because it can sometimes look like the opposite of Ulysses, because it's the one book by Joyce where you have like a dominant style. You can like excerpt 3 lines from Finnegan's Wake from wherever you took them, and you will recognize it as Finnegan's Wake. It has a signature, it has a voice, it has a style. The point, though, is that that style is not necessarily Joyce's, and it's not necessarily anyone's. It's pretty much everyone's. You have like all the voices and all the perspectives and all the history and all literature you can find, and you get this mix of this bizarre white noise of a very singular voice. Again, you have unity in a way, but coming from multiplicity, coming from plurality. And that's where you get something that might be hinted as a project behind Joyce's relation to language and to languages and to voices and persons, individuals. The idea that you always have to pay attention to the many, to the multiple, to the different. And from that, you might sometimes get one person, Stephen Dedalus, sometimes get a portrait of a city, as in Ulysses, and sometimes you may have like the whole humankind coming together from this mishmash of different voices and perspectives. So when you like delve that deep and you understand this concern with the many, with the negation of the central perspective of an author, of a narrator, of or even of a protagonist sometimes, you get to see that this weird play, this strange creature of a play where people speak strangely, where the plot is sometimes contrived in different levels, because not only is the plot maybe contrived from the author to the page, but in the page and in the scene, the plot is contrived by one of the characters. It is invented by one of the characters. It is pushed along by one of the characters. So there is this whole like brand of artificiality in the play. And this strange animal of a play may also be looked at from this perspective. How are we dealing with the mystery of the many, of the different, of the other than me in a play that is, as we know, scandalously biographical, but also weirdly hard to connect to biography or to anything else. I told you we should not need to go deep in details of the translation of the play, because as the title of my intervention here, so to speak, already would imply, I am concerned with the title of the play. The idea is to talk about the title Exiles and about choices in translation. Because, as everyone here knows full well, exile in English is two words. It's not one single word. It may mean, and me and Vitor, we had this discussion like a lot. And I'm looking at him now and I know his mind is going, he's going there again. But yeah, I'm going there again. Exile is two words at least. And I mean, even like historically, the fact is not that the word exile in English has two meanings, as in the person that is an exile and the situation in which that person is, the exile. We can call the person an exilee from here on out, just to make it clear. Not only the exilee, but the exile. It's not that the English word has two meanings. The English word is the result of a conflation of two different words. We're coming again from many to one. Two different French words were like chewed and spat by English speakers as the same thing. And you have an exilee and the exile in the same word, exile. Of course, all speakers know that, and James Joyce, of all people, was very much aware of that. And of course, as well, when he chooses to make the title of the play plural, he was favoring one reading, because when you read the word exiles, you think of people, you think of the persons who are suffering, who are going through, who are living in exile. The small detail of that S, of that plural and the title, makes the balance shift towards the reading of exilees, so to speak. But the fact is, when you translate to most languages in the world, you will probably have to make a choice. You can translate that title as exilees, persons in exile, or as exiles, different situations of exile, different kinds of exile. This is not a word that will usually appear to you as plural in your language. It has to be like a very specific sort of text where you can talk about different sorts of exiles. Usually we think about just the one, the basic one. That's what I mean when I say that the plural in the cover, so to speak, makes the balance shift toward a reading of people, of exilees. Well, you may have guessed by now that I have gone the other way, and I have chosen to call the play Exílios in Portuguese, which means different sorts of exiles and not exilees. We and I always say we when I speak about translations, because it's always a collective decision. It involves publishers and copy desk and Vitors and people who work with you, and and people who will sell the book and who have a lot to say about those sorts of things. But in this case, I will say I, because my friend here by my side and I had our conversations about this. I decided to go with the strangest reading of the text to make it sound weird. And well, a moment for parenthesis here. The translation of Joyce's titles in Brazil has had its spats, so to speak. Like the first translation we've had of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, for some reason, decided to do away with the A, with the article. And the book was called for generations in Brazil, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which is something that only translators notice and discuss and think it matters, but we do. And we do discuss it. Well, in the case of Ulysses, I am the one responsible for all the trouble in Edenville, because when I decided to keep the Y in Ulysses and everyone else writes Ulysses with an I have to answer for it, and I don't. But I created some sort of discontent. And there is endless discussions among all Finnegan's Wake's translators in progress here in Brazil about how to translate or not to translate the title of the book. So translations of titles are always very conspicuous matters and very hot topics among translators. The play had been translated before in Brazil and had been translated as Exiles, Exilados, which makes perfect sense. My point here, and the whole reason why I have been talking about all this to get here, to get to this, is that what Joyce presents us, now faced with a choice that the English reader and the English speaker do not have, because things will remain open. He has like the luxury of the irresolution. You can have it both ways. You can have the cake and eat it too, because the title of the play will not resolve itself. And you will have both readings all the time in your mind, which is fine, which is wonderful. We don't have that choice in Portuguese, or I risk to say it, in most languages. And so now we're faced with something that is really typical of choices in translation in general, and even in literary translation, which is a situation where you get to choose between narrowing a reading or widening it. And we usually think of narrowing as losing something. You will have to leave something out and save something that you can save. Salvage something that you can salvage. But the other way, where you go for the widening, is something that bothers translators even more, because now you seem to be like putting things that weren't there. You seem to be like opening doors that were not necessarily open before. And that can sometimes be daunting, can be even like dangerous for the translator. And my point here is that given all that you can learn from Joyce and with Joyce during the work of translating his novels and his books, when faced with this situation, you have to realize that things may be different than they seem. Because as I told you before, the reading Exiles seems to be the one where you would feel safer, because no one would really ask you to explain what you chose there. It is like the path of least resistance. And you're going for the plurality. You're going for the exiles. Why then did I choose to go the other way? Because my point is something I think that we may connect to all this that I have been saying very awkwardly. The first reading, the reading Exiles, is in a way the narrower version, precisely because it is the path of least resistance. When you translate the title as Exiles, as different sorts of exiles, you embrace more, you accept more things, because the first reading will make you think of the family, of the Rowan family. They are the exiles. They are the ones coming back from exile. And so you, in a way, have indeed closed your perspective, because you say this play is about these three persons. They are coming back from an exile. They are the exiles of the title. They are the subject of the play. And as always with Joyce, I don't know that I'm so sure about it. I don't know that the play is not equally about Beatrice and about Robert and about their own sorts of exiles, of being torn apart from things and places and persons and desires, of being exiled from what they wanted, from where they wanted to be in their lives, in their immediate like surroundings. So my point here is that when I go for the path least trodden, I have to make my reader widen their perspective, because now the play is about this weird idea that there are many sorts of exiles. And I'm not losing things here, because this, of course, still covers Bertha and Richard and Archie. They also have their sorts of exiles, even from each other, even from their native place, not only exile from Ireland, but also exile from Europe or whatever. You go for the wider view by choosing what seemed to be the exceptional reading, the weird reading. And well, of course, I am defending my choices here. Of course, I have my say, I am doing my own writing and my own critiquing, of course. But I ask you, could there be a more Joycean way to deal with choices than realizing that going for the weird, going for the non-obvious, going for the least trodden, you are at the same time making it wider, making it more democratic, making it more open to different readings, to different interpretations, and you are not making your reader or making the person you are talking to, whatever that conversation might be, go for what you are highlighting. You are making it open. You are leaving more doors open. Is there a risk in this for the translator? Yes. This risk is that now you will have to like take an opportunity in a symposium and explain yourself instead of just publishing a book. That might be something unwanted, but that also might point to a sort of responsibility, to a sort of personal investment in your work that comes only from being that long and that deeply involved with a writer and with a series of works that points permanently to that same direction. Choose the many, choose the plurality, choose the opening and the widening, even though that puts you in a position where you have to make yourself noticed for being different, for being weird, for being new. And again, I ask you, isn't that like the essence of what we see in the trajectory of that writer that from Dubliners to Finnegan's Wake faced the problems, the ethical and literary problems involved in dealing with words to represent people and to give something back to people as words? Is there something that connects more to this than this idea? The idea that you have to accept the liability of being read as weird, deviant, or awkward sometimes, and pay the price, because you know that this is what that writer and those books have taught you. I might be wrong, and I'm used to being wrong, but what makes me feel safe in this one choice, and we have been right now speaking for half an hour about a choice of one word that will be in the cover of the book. What makes me feel safe is this idea that I'm, even when I'm putting myself out there and doing something that will attract attention, good or bad, and it shouldn't perhaps be my place as a translator. This is another discussion. I'm doing this out of a deep respect for something I've learned with this author and with those books. I'm doing this as something that is coherent with a whole literary project. To choose whatever you have to choose, to face language, your own language, and of course, language as a whole, as something that is not simply there for you to take the path of least resistance and employ it in a way that will communicate things already understandable by people. You have to face your problems, and you have to deal, and you have to tell language what to do for you. It's a very Humpty Dumptyian situation. You have to tell words what they have to do for you. And I think that this time it came really clearly to me in what will be the cover of the book, and the choice of this one word that curiously is all about exclusion and distance and the pain derived from it. And if one author has been able to pack so much into a word that means the very opposite of what he was trying to, I don't know, focus or eliminate or explain or explore, sorry, this guy should deserve this sort of attention and this sort of, I'd say again, responsibility from his or her translator. And I think that's pretty much what I had to say. I'm so sorry if that was not up to par.
Thank you so much, Caetano, Galindo. Thank you very much. I mean, there are lots of questions now. I could ask you, I mean, immediately, but there is at least one question in the chat, in the live chat here, which I'm going to read to you. It's a question from Maria Ziareski. I think you know her.
I do.
You do. Do you think Joyce's approach to language has something to do with trying to diminish a feeling of displacement, as if he was somehow trying to build, through language, a place he could belong to?
Well, that's deep, and that's almost certainly deeper than I am. Yeah, I think so. I think so, because it feels right to say I think so. What I see is, well, I've been to Trieste, as you have, and I had a life-changing epiphany while I was there about what made the mature Joyce that we know. Because when you walk those streets and when you learn about the history of the place and how it was a multinational, multicultural, multi-everything place from like the dawn of time, and has remained that way till Joyce's time and even till today, I suddenly realized that you take cosmopolitan, culturally cosmopolitan, but you take a kid from a city in an island and you place him in the very crux of every historical, cultural, linguistic crossroads in Europe, and you drop them there, he and his wife. And that, for me, I understood like what went into his head between like the Dubliners and a portrait, and then Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. And I suddenly realized it was like a Satori-like moment of illumination. And I thought, yeah, it's this place, it's this community, it's this plurality, it's this like irrevocable multiplicity around him. And in this way, I can like relate to what Maria said. He was someone that would not, as Stephen Devlin said, he would not belong to Ireland. Ireland had to belong to him. He would be larger than that. He would be an European or a citizen of the world or whatever. He had to build this world, and this world had to be larger than the world he lived in, or more to the point, the world people tried to force him to live in. Family, religion, politics, Ireland, nationalism, nothing would fit him, because I think his aim was something larger than that, some sort of multi-human community. And that is really present in the whole, in the makeup of Leopold Bloom as a character. In Ulysses, as with the contrast of the provincial and the worldwide in Bloom, and especially in Finnegan's Wake. So I'd say yes, he was trying to build a place. I don't know if a place for him to live, but that too, but especially a place for us.
Caetano, I think I've realized we're more and more talking about politics.
Yeah.
You see, I think Exiles is a very political title.
Yeah,
it can be read this way too. When you speak of a wider possibility, a wider interpretation of the play, by calling the play not the exiled people, but the situation, exiles. I mean, do you think you create a more political play? Maybe by not identifying so much the family or the Richard of the play with Joyce. Do you think the play becomes less autobiographical when you do this?
I don't know that it changes the biographical relation. What I do think is, I'm uncomfortable saying like I do it, but what such a choice does is
Okay.
that it makes the, it's weird, isn't it? But I am. It makes the play more political in, again, a wider sense of politics, because it's very easy for us in that moment in time and in that socio-geographical political situation with Ireland and Europe, it's very easy for us to make it narrowly political, involving governments and nations and citizens. And when we go the other way and we like erase that authority of politics in a small mind sense over the word exiles, and we remember that no, lost love can be an exile, and nostalgia for the personal and familiar past could be an exile. You make it political in a wider sense. You make everything political. You make the body, the family, love, adultery, everything a matter of exile, and something susceptible to exile and to being exiled from. And in that way, I think it even, I don't know, of course we are reading like contaminated for our by our like reality today and this godforsaken world we're living in right now. But I think it makes for a more apt reading today also, because it's not
Mhm.
about necessarily like party politics, nation politics, country politics, but about making everything political and the political everything. And so, yeah, I think it might work that way too.
Do we have more questions or comments to Caetano Galindo? Uh, do you know how many times the word exile appears in the play?
I did. I did that. I did that word count once, but I don't have it here with me right now.
More than 3 times.
I'd say so, but
Yeah, because
I don't remember.
there's a very interesting part of the play where the word exile appears 3 times in a row, and always in the sense of the situation, not the person. I mean, maybe this is something that is in chimes with your decision, your translation decision.
Yeah. Now that you say that, I'm doing a word search like right now, and
I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It says,
I
for
find
example,
7.
7. Okay.
7. 2 are in the title and the index, so 5 times in the place as Exilius, or in like varieties of exile, and not once as exilee or person in exile. So yeah, all the time the play mentions exiles. They mention sorts, types, kinds of exiles, or the situation of exile.
Now, when we think of, for example, the dead, it can be the dead person. It can also be the dead people. But
Yeah.
Most translators go for the dead people. In Portuguese, for example, os mortos. Only in Portugal, for some time, it was called morto, but in Spanish, it was always in the plural, in French, in German, etc. Why do you think there's this translation choice option for widening the canvas, to put it this way, in the case of the dead, and maybe narrowing the canvas in the case of exiles?
Well, first of all, I remember like agonizing over it when I translated the story, because I translated that story before I translated the whole book for that one special volume that they published called The Dead here in Brazil. I remember that like very clearly, and I remember thinking that if I was to choose, like if there was no history of translation of the story, if I was the only one responsible for choosing and there was no publisher, I would go for The Dead singular, o morto, because I really think that even like the puzzle of who is this dead person till the very end of the story would add to the story and to the structure of the story. At the same time, I remember it's weird. Now you say that, and I was right here in this very place. And I remember thinking that the whole idea that the dead might also be not only the dead people from the past, but the whole dance situation, and the idea that the thing might be a reading of, there might be a mythical reading of the thing, like the Dance of the Dead, was very powerful to me too. Today, I don't know what I would choose, but then again, there was a history, and it is different with Exiles, because even though the play has been translated, there is not like a huge cultural presence of the text in Portuguese now. And the Dead, well, there had been translations before me, and there is the movie, and people remember the story as the Dead. or even like The Living and the Dead, as we call the movie. But I'd say that it's one of those situations where recognizability plays its part. Is it possible to play a part? I think so. In the end, I went with, let's go with the flow. Let's go with everybody already knows this story as. I wouldn't change something that would be so like conspicuous, but I would have reasons. Even after all I said today, I would have to probably choose O Morto, even though it's kind of contradictory. You're muted.
Sorry. So in the case of the Dead, tradition was a constraint to you. I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's a win-lose situation. You have to face some responsibilities, but sometimes it's not worth it. Like if for some reason a portrait of the artist as a young man had always been called Stephen Dedalus in Brazil, you would have to think very hard to change that, because people would think it was a different book when they saw it. So even when sometimes the previous generation of translators have made like questionable choices, sometimes their presence is like something you have to consider. There is this, for all of you who are not Brazilian readers here, we have a very famous situation with the translation of Wuthering Heights. It's a very bad title we have in Portuguese, but we've had it for like forever. And I would not change that, because people think of the novel like that. That's how they recognize the novel. So you face the losses and you bite your lip and you go.
You may be the first translator in a Latin language to use Exiles. Do you know that? I mean, did you do research about other titles, other translations of the title? Because I think you were the first one.
No, I didn't. I have a friend who does that sort of thing for me.
Okay.
So I didn't.
And do you think maybe the choice for exilado or exilados, the people and not the situation, do you think it was biased maybe by Joyce's own suggestion when Carlo Linati was translating the title into Italian?
Oh yeah. And that's one of the things that sometimes gets in the way, because I was here all about respecting Joyce's project and respecting Joyce and etc. But at the same time, when you translate Ulysses and you're faced like with those tables of references he made, sometimes you have to take those things with a grain of salt, because we know the circumstances in which they were done. And even his opinions on some things might not be like, I don't know, central to your decisions, because he really didn't. The point is, translations are done for their time, for the world, and for their time. And in this, at least in this, they are a minor art if you compare them to like writing a novel, because you write a novel for all the world and all the time, hopefully. And I don't translate for all the world and all the time. I translate for only my language and for my publishing world and for my readership. And so I have to like make choices informed by things that are around me right now, and not necessarily what was around Joyce when he thought about translation.
I think your presentation shows us that it is one of the roles of translation and translators to offer new possibilities to readers. And I think this is what you are doing. And, I have been thinking too about this title. I had never thought so much about this title, but now I've been thinking a lot because of the the task I have accepted of writing about it. And I think I am now reading the play in a different way too. I face the characters in a different way. And I have the impression that reading Exiles instead, not instead, but and at the same time reading Exilados, the play becomes either less biographical or more political to me. That's my experience as a reader of the play when I have the two translations in mind.
Yeah, and that's central. There may be, and there certainly is not, a correct response to this translation. But it's better to live in a world where there are both, and you have one and the other. I always compare literary translators to music interpreters, like pianists. And I'd rather live in a world where I have like 10 different recordings of the Goldberg variations, because each one of them makes me hear different things, makes me conceive of the pieces of the music as something different, and that's enriching by itself.
We have maybe a last question here by Owen O'Neill. Somebody mentioned to me that musicality could be a way to hear Joyce. It minded me of Lévi-Strauss. Do you believe some sort of analogy could make sense? I think it reminded me of Lévi-Strauss. Do you believe some sort of analogy could make sense?
Well, it depends on what Joyce we're talking about. Finnegan's Wake is all about music, and it's probably like the only way to understand the book, and I think to also the only way to translate the book. It's about hearing the music and producing that music or a different music in your translation. That's where he like went all the way, and he even in a way like abandoned language for music. But that's like the last thing he wrote. For the rest of his work, I think music plays a very important role in all his work, because he was a very musical person, as am I, and there is, I don't know, I have a personal thing for Irish English. I mean, people may like read me a shopping list and I will find it musical and beautiful and it will put a smile on my face. I don't really know why, but it's always there for me. And it's in a distilled version, it's always in Joyce. So he's really a very musically minded writer and a very musical writer. And of course, that helps to read him, to make sense of him. The tougher sessions of Ulysses sometimes come alive when you read them aloud and when some good reader reads them aloud for you, because then it suddenly makes sense. For one thing, because they were really built as speech, and for another, because the person who reads already has to make choices and already has to accent things in different ways as they belong to thought or speech or that character or that other character. And those things are very complicated in a book like Ulysses, to decide if that sentence comes from the inner voice of that person or from the public voice of that other person or from the narrator. And when you read, you are already interpreting, you are already translating, you are making choices, and you are putting emphasis and accenting different things. So that's how sometimes music helps, not only the abstract idea of music, but the fact that music is unheard until someone plays it. And Ulysses is also a book where you have to play it, you have to feel it, you have to let it go through you and to come out of you as voice sometimes.
Well, I'm sure those who are following us now are going to read the play in a different way. And those who will watch our conversation later are going to read the play in a different way too. Thank you for your time, your words. It was very insightful. It was a good way to show how language can be political too, and how complex titles in Joyce are. Thank you so much for your participation. Your translation is going to be published very soon, and there will be reviews, and I hope reviewers mention you and your choice and discuss it, and maybe next year you can join us again and speak about the feedback you will have received about the translation. It's going to be a pleasure. Thank you so much on behalf of the ABEI team, the organizing committee. Thank you so much. Thank you.